ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूप कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकम्। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरोः श्रीयुतपदकमलं श्रीगुरुन् वैष्णवंश्च। श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सहगणरघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवम् साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधाकृष्णपादान् सहगणललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च। नमं विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्तस्वामिनिति नामिने। नमस्ते सारस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषशून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे। हे कृष्ण करुणा सिन्धो दीनबन्धो जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिकान्त राधाकान्त नमोऽस्तुते। तप्तकाञ्चन गौराङ्गी राधे वृन्दावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपासिन्धुभ्यैव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्रीकृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभो नित्यानन्द श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौरभक्तवृन्द। हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। Hare Krishna. Welcome back. Today we are going to start a new chapter, chapter 8, that is attaining the Supreme. In the previous chapter, Bhagavan ends with a verse where he mentions a few unusual words which we generally don't hear in our everyday life. That is adhidaiva, adhiyajna, adhibhuta. So Arjuna is now going to ask the questions. As he is representing ourselves and he could not understand what the terms mean. And Bhagavan also says in the last verse of chapter 7, that is prayana kale chamam te vidur yukta chetasaha. So we discussed that yukta chetasaha means Bhagavan concludes that, see Arjuna, whose mind is engaged in me, that is, who is fully Krishna conscious, he can know me at the time of death in full. That is, he can know me as the governing principle of material manifestation and the governing principle of the devas and the governing principle of the sacrifices. That is adhibhuta, adhidaiva and adhiyajna. Sa adhibhuta, sa adhidaiva and sa adhiyajna. So, and why he can understand at the time of death? It means who is yukta chetasaha, whose mind is engaged in me, and he who knows me in full. And in this life only, prayanakala, in this life only, he may be able to know me. And how he will be able to know, that will be discussed in this chapter. So, if one can know the Lord by the principles and whose mind is absorbed in the Lord, then all the life he will act in the consciousness, in the divine consciousness. And as a result, he will engage himself in devotional activities. And in this way, how he will be able to know the Lord completely, that will be discussed in this chapter. That is why it is attaining the Supreme. So we will recite. So text 1. Arjuna uvacha kim tad brahma kim adhyatmam kim karma purushottama adhibhutam cha kim proktam adhidaivam kim uchyate. Synonyms. Arjuna uvacha, Arjuna said, kim what? Tat, that, Brahma, Brahman, kim what? Adhyatmam, the self, kim what? Karma, fruitive activities, Purusha Uttama, O Supreme Person, Adhibhutam, the material manifestation, Cha, and kim what? Proktam is called, Adhidaivam, the demigods, kim what? Uchyate is called. Translation. Arjuna inquired, O my Lord, O Supreme Person, what is Brahman? What is the self? What are fruitive activities? What is this material manifestation? And what are the demigods? Please explain this to me. And we will also recite the next verse. अधियज्ञः कथं कोत्र देहेऽस्मिन् मधुसूदन प्रयाणकाले च कथं ज्ञेयोऽसि नियतात्मभिः. Adhiyajnaha, the Lord of Sacrifice. Katham, how. Kaha, who. Atra, here. Dehe, in this body. Asmin, this. Madhusudana, O Madhusudana. Prayana kale, at the time of death. Cha, and. Katham, how. Gneyaha, see, you can be known. Niyata atmabhihi, by the self-controlled. Translation. Who is the Lord of sacrifice and how does he live in the body, O Madhusudana? And how can those engaged in devotional service know you at the time of death? Okay. So, see, in the first verse only, Arjuna addresses Krishna as Purushottama. That is the Supreme Person. That means Arjuna is not questioning to a friend, but to the Supreme Person. He knows that Krishna is a supreme authority who can give the definitive answers to all his questions. Which means he had already accepted Krishna as his guru, as we studied in the second chapter, and how he surrendered completely, and how he is faithful. All these things we can understand by the tone and the words being used in this conversation. So we see that Arjuna asks 8 questions here. So before we start explaining, I would like to give you an overview of this chapter. This chapter has 28 shlokas altogether, and for the convenience of our discussion, we have divided in 6 sections. The first one is 1 to 4, these 4 verses where Arjuna questions and Krishna answers. Then 5 to 9, Krishna explains about Smaranam, remembering Krishna. And then 10 to 13, we see Bhagavan tells about Yoga Mishra Bhakti. And from 14 to 16, he says about pure devotional service. And then from 17 to 22, there is a comparison between material and spiritual world. And in the last section, that is 23 to 28, attaining the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. So we see in these two shlokas, 1 and 2, Arjuna asks 8 questions altogether. What are they? The first is, what is Brahman? Kim tad Brahma? Then Kim Adhyatmam? What is Adhyatma, or what is self? Then what is Karma? Kim Karma? What is Karma? Adhibhutam cha kim proktam adhidaivam kim uchyate. So what is Adhibhuta and what is Adhidaivam? So Adhibhuta and Adhidaivam. And in the next, that is verse number 2, he says Adhiyajñah katham kotro dehesmin Madhusudana. So what is Adhiyajñah? And where does Adhiyajña live in this body? That is also another question. And then how can you, that is Krishna, be known at the time of death? Prayanakale cha katham jneyosi. How are you known at the time of death? So here we see Bhagavan gives answer in verse number 3 and 4. And here in verse number 2, this Madhusudana, this address is also important. As Bhagavan is the killer of the demon named Madhu, so he may kill all the demon-like doubts that are arising in the mind of Arjuna. So this is the purpose of saying or addressing Madhusudana. So Purushottama in the first verse, and then Madhusudana in the second verse. And now we will see how beautifully Bhagavan answers the question to the questions of Arjuna. Okay, so we will recite. Shri Bhagavanuvacha Aksharam Brahma Paramam Svabhavoodhyatmamuchyate Bhuta Bhavodbhavakaro Visargah Karma Sangnitaha. Shri Bhagavanuvacha, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, said, Aksharam, indestructible, Brahma, Brahman, Paramam, transcendental, Svabhavaha, eternal nature, Adhyatmam, the self, Uchyate is called, Bhuta Bhava Udbhavakaraha, producing the material bodies of the living entities, Visargaha, creation, Karma, fruitive activities, Samgnitaha is called. Samgnitaha is called. Translation. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, the indestructible, transcendental living entity is called Brahman, and his eternal nature is called Adhyatma, the self. Action pertaining to the development of material bodies of the living entities is called karma, or fruitive activities. The next verse. अधिभूतं क्षरो भावः पुरुषश्चाधिदैवतम् अधियज्ञोऽहमेवात्र देहे देहभृतं वर. अधिभूतं. 1 minute. Happened. Adhibhutam, the physical manifestation. Ksharaha, constantly changing. Bhavaha, nature. Purushaha, the universal form, including all the demigods like the sun and moon. Cha and Adhidaivatam, called Adhidaiva. Adhiyajnaha, the super soul. Aham, I, that is Krishna. Eva, certainly. Atra, in this. Dehe, body. Dehabhritam, of the embodied. Vara, O beast. Translation. O beast of the embodied beings, the physical nature, which is constantly changing, is called Adhibhuta, that is the material manifestation. The universal form of the Lord, which includes all the demigods like those of the sun and moon, is called Adhidaiva. And I, the Supreme Lord, represented as the Super Soul in the heart of every embodied being, am called Adhiyajna, that is the Lord of Sacrifice. So in these two verses, Bhagavan answers to the 7 questions of Arjuna. The last question, that is, how can you be known at the time of death, will be answered in the verses starts from 5 and ends to 15. Because this question is very, very important. So Bhagavan takes time to answer that question. Okay. So we see which means what is Brahman? Bhagavan says, Arjuna, Brahman is Jivatma as well as Paramatma. So this is as we know that the absolute truth is known as Brahman, Paramatma and Bhagavan. And the individual soul, in addition, is also known as Brahman. So that is why the Supreme Soul is not only Brahman, he is Parabrahman. So the next question, what is Adhyatma? Bhagavan says, Arjuna, it is swabhava. Swabhavaha adhyatmam uchyate. So, adhyatmam, that is, we see Atma, according to the Vedic dictionary, refers to mind, soul, body, and senses also. And Bhagavan says Swabhava, that is the eternal nature of Jivatma. We see the living entity and the Lord both are same in quality, but not in quantity. That is why Jivatma is Brahma and Paramatma, that is Bhagavan, is Parabrahma. And we see our material consciousness is like this, that we try to be the controller. And as a result of this, we are trapped in the karmic cycle. And this karma, the next question, what is karma? Karma is that action which causes the development of material bodies. Bhagavan says, Bhuta bhavodbhava karo. Bhuta bhava udbhava kara. So, now the situation, why the living entity, as we discussed, he is always placed in between the material energy and the spiritual energy, though he belongs to the spiritual energy, but he tends to move towards material energy because of wrong identification with the matter. And sometimes he becomes able to identify with the superior nature, and then he no more identifies himself with the material body, rather with the one spiritual body. Now, when the spiritual body, instead of identifying with the spiritual body, he identifies himself with the material body, that is Dehatma Buddhi, then he takes birth in any one of the 8.4 million species. So we see the basis of transmigration is what? It is karma. Karma is the basis of transmigration. And then we see the living entity, which is an eternal fragmental part and parcel of myself, as Bhagavan says in 15.7, Māmevam sho jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatanaha. And also we get the evidence from Vedic literatures which distinguishes Brahman from Parabrahman. Supreme Lord is Achyuta. That is, he is infallible. He never falls. But Jiva may fall down. And we see that for the elevation to the heavenly planets, the Sakama Karmis perform yajna, that is Vedic sacrifices. But what is the viewpoint of Krishna consciousness? That is, just take direct Krishna consciousness and go back to Godhead. There is no need to perform such sacrifices. Because we know in this Kali Yuga, in this era, it is impossible to perform the sacrifices in a proper manner. We cannot arrange the ingredients. We cannot find a proper place. We cannot find the priests who can perform the sacrifice in the manner directed in the Vedas. Today, you see how many of us can understand the Deva Bhasha, that is Sanskrit. We don't understand. Even we cannot recite also properly with proper pronunciation. So this is our situation. So how can we perform the sacrifices? So we see that this Swabhava, that is Adhyatma, is intimately connected with Jiva. That is why it is Swabhava, Bhava which is Swa. That is the impressions held in the subtle elements, and it accompanies the Jiva birth after birth. So that is why the impressions are so strong in our mind, which makes samskaras also. And we see that Adhibhuta, that is the physical nature, which is constantly changing. The physical nature manifests 6 kinds of changes of body, we know, that is birth, growth, sustenance, reproduction, dwindling, and death. So these 6 changes. That is why it is constantly changing, the material manifestation. And see, Adhidaiva. What is Adhidaiva? Adhidaiva is the Virat Rupa of the Lord, which is consisting of 14 planetary systems. And this Virat Rupa is contemplated by the neophytes, that is the attached yogis. So the attached yogis, they try to have a dharana of the Virat Rupa. So they contemplate on that. And the gigantic universal form of the Lord. which is Adhidaiva, Adhidaivata, and it includes all the devas. And the sun and moon, as we know in the Virata Rupa, it is very beautifully explained in Śrimad Bhagavatam. Sun and moon, we consider the two eyes of the Lord as sun and moon. And different other explanations are also there. And the different lokas, that is Patala, Rasatala, Mahatala, Talatala, Sutala, Vitala, Atala, and then Mahitala, or which is known as Bhu, that is earth, and then Bhuvaha, Swaha, that is Swargaloka, then Maharloka, Janhaloka, Tapahaloka, and then Satyaloka or Brahmaloka. So it is said that Patala is the bottom of the feet of the Lord, and the heels and toes are Rasatala, and then ankles are Mahatala, and then shanks Talatala, then knees Sutala, then the lower part of the thighs are Vitala, and the upper part of the thighs are Atala, and then Mahitala, the hips of the Lord, and then Bhuvaha, that is the outer space, it's the navel of the Lord, and the chest is Swargaloka, and the neck is Maharloka, then mouth or face, we can say, is the Janhaloka, and then Tapoloka is the forehead, and finally Satyaloka is the Lord's head. So it is described very beautifully. Many other things are also explained, very beautifully described. It is not possible to discuss in this short class. And we see the detached yogi, they contemplate on the Paramatma feature, which is Adhiyagnya. Adhiyagnya, that is the super soul situated in the hearts of every living entity as Paramatma. So the two questions are answered here. The Supreme Lord, represented as the super soul, he is the Adhiyagnya, and the Lord of Sacrifice, Adhiyagnya, lives in the, where he lives in the body, he lives in the heart of every living entity. So technically we can say that Indra is also the god of sacrifice. In some places where it is with the Karmakanda part we can see, but here in this case, as he is mentioned that residing in the heart of the living entity, so of course there is no doubt that Bhagavan is not talking about Indra, and he is also talking very clearly. See the verse, just a minute. Adhiyagnya ahamevatra dehe deha bhritam varaha. So Bhagavan very clearly says, Aham, Adhiyagnya, Aham eva atra dehe. So deha bhritam vara. So, O Arjuna, you are the best among the embodied. And as if Bhagavan is pointing his finger towards Arjuna, see Arjuna in the heart of Arjuna. So you are the best of all the embodied, and I reside in the heart of every living entities as Adiyajna, O Arjuna. He shows his finger very definitively. So how beautiful. Okay, so the next question, the last question will be answered as we just said. It is a very important one, so it will take time. And that will be discussed in the next section that we will study in our next class. That is remembering Krishna. Remembering Krishna. Okay. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Thank you for joining.